Hi, I'm Douglas Mason, President and CEO of Rainy Mountain Royalty Corp., RMO, on the TSX Venture Exchange. Rainy Mountain Royalty Corp. is a Canadian-based mineral exploration project generator. The company currently holds multiple property interests in Ontario with joint venture partners and is seeking further joint venture partners for other drill-ready properties in our portfolio. For more information, please visit our website at rmroyalty.com or call me at 604-922-2030.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is award-winning investigative reporter Bob Mackin, the publisher of thebreaker.news. Welcome back to the show, Bob.
Thank you.
Bob, it seems the BC NDP government is in no rush to introduce freedom of information legislation that would cover the operation of the legislature.
That's right. I was at the legislature on Tuesday, the same day as the latest meeting of the Legislative Assembly Management Committee, which is chaired by the Speaker, Darrell Pluckus. And one of the members of that committee is the House Leader for the NDP, who is also the Solicitor General, and that's Mike Farnworth. And Mike Farnworth, on February 5th, responded to the open letter from the Information and Privacy Commissioner and a couple of other watchdogs. Their letter asked for the immediate inclusion of the legislature in the Freedom of Information law. Yes, the legislature, which is where our government meets, which is a very important building, which spends more than $70 million a year, is not covered by the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, which the NDP brought in back in the early 1990s. And because of the reports by Darrell Pluckus, by the Speaker, who has exposed corruption and waste in the legislature, specifically in the offices of the clerk and Sergeant-at-Arms, that gave rise to calls by people in the media, as well as the Information Privacy Commissioner himself, Michael McAvoy, saying that this has got to stop. The FOI law has got to be extended to include the legislature. And Mike Farnworth responded in the affirmative on February the 5th and said it would happen. And a week later, the throne speech said it would happen. Just didn't give us a timeline. The expectation was that they were going to get to work on this as soon as possible. I asked Mike Farnworth what the update is, and he said in no uncertain terms that it will not happen this spring. The earliest it can happen is the fall, and the reason being that he gave me was that there is a process, that when they make laws, it goes through a process. They've got committees that and council who get together and have to write laws, and it seems to me a rather long process. I mean, our government moves slow to begin with, and this is just a part of that. But having said that, this is the kind of issue that I would have expected the NDP government to work a little harder to solve, especially after public opinion polls and the onslaught of media attention earlier this year showed that this was a major issue, that what was going on with suspended clerk Craig James and suspended Sergeant-at-Arms Gary Lenz was resonating with the public. It was, as Darrell Pluckus, the Speaker, promised, it was making people sick to their stomach about the money that was wasted. And this money would not have been wasted had there been some sunlight shone on the offices of the clerk and Sergeant-at-Arms. They seem to have exploited the fact that they were not subject to the Freedom of Information law like the politicians whose offices were just down the hallway are. However perverse that is, but the NDP said it will change. It's just not going to change fast enough. Well, I did ask Michael McAvoy, the Information Privacy Commissioner, for his thoughts on this, and he said essentially that he hopes that the NDP does spend this time, and that he thinks the NDP does need to take this time to get it right. He was also hoping that when they do get around to making the changes and adding the legislature to the Freedom of Information law, that they add some other things, such as mandatory privacy breach legislation.
Now, when you say mandatory privacy breach, is that the government digging into your stuff improperly?
Well, it's the government. Well, yeah, the government can try to dig into our stuff, our personal information improperly. More often than not, it's the government not keeping care of our personal information, such as what happened recently with the BC Pension Corporation and those people who are involved in the BC College Plan. There was some moving happening at the offices last September, and there was a box of microfiche of people who are members of the BC College Pension Plan. Somehow they lost that in September. They discovered it in October, and it took them until last week to go public with it. They finally told the Information Privacy Commissioner's office back in March that, oops, we lost this information, we're declaring a privacy breach, but it wasn't until March 29th that they sent out letters to about 8,000 people who were affected, and a list of about 9 types of data that went missing in the microfiche, including their full names, their social insurance numbers, information about payments through the college pension plan. And one of those people that was affected was John Martin, who is a Chilliwack, BC Liberal MLA, who has been a criminology associate professor at the University College of the Fraser Valley. He recently had a problem with one of his payment cards that he was notified that there was a privacy matter there and had to have issued new cards. He's wondering if that's connected to this, but at the same time, he's rather shocked that it took this long from last fall to this spring to notify people. And Michael McAvoy, the Information Privacy Commissioner, took this opportunity to issue a statement to remind the NDP that, hey, BC needs mandatory privacy breach legislation, that when a ministry, an agency, a crown corporation loses our data or is the victim of theft of our data, they have to tell the Information Privacy Commissioner and the affected persons as soon as possible, because this is a violation of people's privacy, and you can understand how someone like John Martin, the Chilliwack Liberal MLA, feels violated. That well, where did this go? Who has it? And what have they done with it? And why didn't the public body report it much sooner? The interesting part of this is that there was the spin that was put out by the BC Pension Corporation that some media outlets ran with, that because this was microfiche, that people didn't have much to worry about, that it's sort of an outdated kind of medium. Well, if you go to your local library, you can find a microfiche reader. And if you go online and Google microfiche readers for sale, you can find a microfiche reader. There's some that are under $50 on some websites. And not only that, but this is the 21st century, and anything is possible, including digitized microfiche readers. So you can get a microfiche reader, and you can put your microfiche in there, and push a few buttons, and lo and behold, you can get what's on the microfiche transferred to a USB stick. And you can do all kinds of interesting things with that. Again, the data revolution is such that it's given new life to old media that people thought was obsolete. So just because it's microfiche in a box that went missing, that nobody knows where it went, doesn't mean that whoever does have it, if someone does have it, could not decide to do some adverse things with, and sell that information and do all sorts of things that cause people a lot of grief and perhaps even financial problems.
Bob, were you shocked or surprised or just stunned to find out that there are no federally funded officers in BC looking into money laundering?
I was shocked, although this might explain why the RCMP has done such a poor job on this file. It's unfortunate that this wasn't handled under the BC Liberals, of course, and I think there could be a case made that there should be some criticism for the NDP, that it did take a while for this to come out, but again, this is in Peter German's report. This is a chapter of Peter German's report that was released early, much earlier than the rest of the report, for David Eby to tell the public about, and also send a message to the federal government, which has decided to put some more money into this area to deal with money laundering, but also to remind the federal government of its responsibilities to properly staff, not only properly fund, but properly staff its departments for federal policing, on such an important file as this, where you've got a couple of dozen positions that aren't all filled, less than half of them are filled, and those that are working right now, about 5 people, are not actually on investigations. They're working on civil forfeiture files. So they're working more or less on paperwork instead of being out there following the money and trying to find the bad money, the dirty money, and try to make arrests. and make cases for prosecution. So this doesn't come at a good time, especially when a place like Surrey is trying to figure out if it should leave the RCMP behind and start its own municipal police force. It's not good for the brand, even though this is the federal side of things of the RCMP. Surrey, of course, has a contract for municipal police services with the RCMP. The RCMP as a whole has been facing some tough questions about how it's been dealing with white-collar crime for so many years. Of course, under the Harper conservative years, the focus was really shifted for the force to dealing with terrorist threats. And, of course, that's an important area, but they seem to have cut back in so many areas and shifted funding and resources to other areas to focus on big issues like terrorism, and they left behind money laundering and other corruption, when in fact, if you talk to senior officers in that area, they'll say that everything is connected, that terrorists are also out there trying to raise money, and terrorists are sometimes raising money through money laundering, through the sale of drugs, through gambling, through the sale of real estate and securities. That they're out there, and this should be taking a holistic approach to crime, and white collar crime. Transparency International Canada have pinpointed that Canada has become a haven for money laundering. They call it snow washing, and this is an issue that needs to be. And here you have some solid evidence that it hasn't been dealt with properly because it has been managed properly, because you've had police force not fulfilling its obligations to citizens, but also fulfilling its obligations to other police forces in the international community, because the federal police here be working with other federal agencies to try to deal with this problem, because this problem really knows no borders. That if Canada is not properly fulfilling its responsibilities to help out the American investigators or Mexican investigators or deal with the Chinese money, then it's allowing Canada to be a haven for criminals. So yeah, this definitely is another black eye for the RCMP. It was interesting that when David Eby and Peter German had their news conference, it was an 11 a.m. news conference, and I wasn't the only reporter doing this, but trying to get a comment as soon as possible from the RCMP. It took them until almost 6 o'clock. It took them about 7 hours to send out a statement about what was going on inside their offices and why they weren't dealing with this problem, and for them to confirm that, yes, indeed, it was a staffing and resourcing issue. They released a long word salad about this, but it's going to take a while for this situation to be corrected, even with the new federal money.
Well, of course, we know investigative journalism 101 is follow the money. Why couldn't they do that?
Good question. But again, federal bureaucracies that don't act very nimble. And then there's the question of the politicians and the political nature, the political aspect of this. We've got a situation where every 4 years our politicians go back to the electorate seeking to get reelected, and one of the ways that they often get reelected is through economics, by saying the economy is better than it was 4 years ago when you elected me. More people are working than it was 4 years ago when you reelected me, so reelect me now. It's such a short-term cycle we have with our politicians that they rely on that convenient message to more often than not get reelected. That if they can, by any means necessary, make the economy more active and put more people to work, then they believe that translates into reelection. And I think that is in many ways the root of all the problems that we face now. They don't want to constrain the economy in any way. Therefore, this is what happens. This is a byproduct. It's almost as if we asked for it this way, and we should not be wanting it to be this way. Maybe this will wake up our politicians and wake up the electorate to a new reality, to bring justice issues back to the equation.
Should people be asking how corrupt are our politicians if they allow this to happen? Just because none of them have been nailed for taking bribes doesn't mean they're not, does it?
Well, that's a good question, too. We need more regulation to look over the shoulders of our politicians. In the federal budget, there was a lot of money that was thrown at this for more officers to be dealing with issues of white-collar crime, which is all fine and good. But what Canada really needs right now is what we've seen in other jurisdictions. I mean, there's anti-corruption squads of police and prosecutors in Quebec as a legacy of the Charbonneau Commission. There's which is modeled after the anti-corruption agency in New York, and one of the anti-corruption agencies that is getting international headlines is in Brazil, the Operation Car Wash squad, and some of those prosecutors were actually in Vancouver in the fall of 2017 to attend an award ceremony at UBC in its Allard Anti-Corruption Awards. And I think one of the reasons why Trudeau didn't go as far as emulating that model is not because of cost, it's because the model in Brazil has snared politicians. And I think you've got politicians like Justin Trudeau, whose ethics right now are very much debated over the SNC-Lavalin scandal. I think politicians like Justin Trudeau are reluctant to go that far because they're scared of their inner circle being snared. They don't want to see their political allies go to jail for whatever they did, the decisions they did that maybe went wrong, which I think is inexcusable. I don't think politicians, because of their positions, should receive any different regulation than a school teacher, a businessman. That is, I think the only way we're going to see that come along is if the problem gets worse and if the house of cards of corruption falls down. But I think ultimately we need better regulation of our politicians. For instance, municipally in British Columbia, a politician cannot be simply excluded from office, removed from office, just by virtue of being charged or convicted of a crime. It's exceedingly difficult to remove a politician from office, and that shouldn't be that way. That politician who has done wrong, there should be some sort of mechanism written into the law that says that if they are convicted, then they're excluded from office automatically. That's one thing there. Again, we need more transparency, and we need to, I think, have other ways for the public to look out for the politicians. One thing we don't have here in British Columbia that they have in other provinces are civic auditors general, who are focused on cities. I mean, Toronto has its own auditor general. In Victoria, at the legislature, there is an office of the Auditor General for local government, but that's been so ineffective. It's been around a number of years, and one municipality that's never audited is the City of Vancouver, which is the biggest municipality. You'd think that would have been on top of their list to start auditing. But no, the Auditor General for local government has not audited the City of Vancouver. So here you've got the situation in which, if you look at what, and we'll bring it back to the RCMP situation, was that out of complete incompetence? That they just didn't have it properly staffed and didn't fill in those positions where officers were off on leave, that they weren't meeting minimum requirements, and especially going after criminal cases? Was this just by happenstance of bad management, of complete incompetence, or was the system designed this way? The more you see it, the more you've got to ask is this just the way it's designed? And that gives rise to more questions about public inquiries and why there should be public inquiries to get the accountability to find out, okay, is this complete incompetence or is corruption at the root? And that's why we need to get these questions answered.
We'll have more with Bob Mackin right after this.
Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications, patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Hi, I'm Douglas Mason, President and CEO of Magnum Gold Corp, MGI and the TSX Venture Exchange. A 2015 drill program on the LH property intersected several high-grade gold intersections, including 11 meters of 20.66 grams per ton gold. Additional drill targets on the LH property have been identified by a 2018 drone airborne magnetic survey to further evaluate a pyrrhotite-enriched gold-bearing system. Please visit our website at magnumgoldcorp.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Bob Mackin. Bob, is it true both the BC Liberals and NDP are using taxpayer money for partisan ads?
Yes, they are, and reported first in the Breaker.News on both counts. 2 weeks ago, I woke up and turned on the radio and in the morning, and the first ad I heard was an ad for the BC NDP caucus, extolling the virtues of Premier John Horgan and saying some nasty things about opposition leader, BC Liberal leader Andrew Wilkinson, about his wishes to lower taxes for the richest people in BC, and how John Horgan was doing some great things for BC, according to the BC NDP caucus. I contacted the BC NDP caucus, and they wouldn't tell me how much they were spending on that. They were keeping that secret, and they were also not wanting to tell me who the contractor was. I guess because it's a caucus expense, and caucus expenses are in the legislature, and the legislature is not covered by the FOI law, so there's no legal requirement for them to be transparent and honest to me or anyone in the public. Now, the Liberals, lo and behold, this week started their own 30-second radio ad paid for by the BC Liberal caucus, which is essentially us. So it's a tit-for-tat ad war that we haven't seen here in BC, because parties, when they've wanted to advertise in the past, have advertised through their own channels, through their parties, and sometimes for the party in power, they've used our taxpayers' money to run big image campaigns through the government communications department. But in this case, both parties are using their caucuses as the vehicle for these radio ads at a time when we still are living in the post-Plecas report era, when the public has shown more interest in how money is being spent at the legislature, and the public also has shown through some opinion polls, like the one that Research Co. did, about a desire to have the FOI law to cover the legislature, so we can keep an eye on the politicians and the staff that work there, and how we can find out how they're spending our money and what they're communicating about. They're very reasonable. But so you've got these two caucuses that are acting in this fashion, advertising against each other, using very partisan language. For the NDP, it was bad enough because in the 2017 campaign, they promised to ban partisan government advertising. And it wasn't any ifs, ands, or buts, no loopholes, just because this one comes from the caucus versus coming from government communications. It was a pretty general statement that they were going to ban partisan government advertising. And here they are, they broke their promise, and the Liberals could have, according to Dermot Travis of Integrity BC, when I interviewed him, he said the Liberals could have actually taken the high road. The Liberals could have said, nope, we're not going to do this, and if we're going to advertise, we'll advertise out of the party headquarters, and they could have tried to shame the NDP, but instead, it became tit for tat. The Liberals thought if they can't beat them, why not join them? And it seems rather silly, like children in many ways.
Well, we've seen their behavior in the legislature, and yes, they do behave like a bunch of 3-year-olds throwing temper tantrums. You'd expect better behavior in the House, but they are politicians. What are the few jobs in the world where you don't need any previous training or qualifications to do?
And in some ways, we should apologize to children as well for comparing them to politicians.
Yes, children don't know any better because they're children. Politicians should know better. Mm-hmm. Bob, is there any way for these people to become more accountable? And the Liberals, it seems, have so far been the ones who are most eager to dip into the taxpayer pot and pull out money for partisan ads that maybe perhaps they shouldn't.
Well, the Liberals have the history of doing so. When Gordon Campbell was premier, he got into power in 2001 at a time when the NDP in the 1990s had spent way too much on advertising. And I remember when Christy Clark was in opposition, slamming the NDP for what they were doing. It was John McPhail that he criticized. And so there you had it. The Liberals came to power, and for a time, Gordon Campbell actually issued an edict and said that, no, we're going to do much less of this kind of advertising. We can't do it within 4 months of an election. Of course, they were starting to spend money to get ready for the Olympics and do whatever they can to make sure the public knew that the BC Liberals were responsible for the Olympics and all the money that was being spent. Then things really, all the edicts that Gordon Campbell sent down about government advertising and trying to get it under control, were thrown out the window by the Christy Clark administration. And so Christy Clark, in the last year and a half in power, spent about $20 million on ads which were clearly partisan, trying to better the image of the governing party on the way to the election. And that money should really have come from the Liberal Party's pockets themselves. Instead, they ran government advertising, $20 million. Some of that money was given to friends who were contractors, and that's what gave rise to the NDP making that promise in their campaign platform, which the NDP eventually quit. The bigger problem here is, the overall problem is our system allows the party in power, without much in the way of restraints, to use communications to its advantage so that it can stay in power. And we see this more in Canadian governments than the U.S. governments. Back in the late 60s, early 70s, there were federal reports, strategies made about, how should the government respond to the change in the communications infrastructure back then. That was becoming more of a society dominated by television. And now we're faced with essentially what's a permanent campaign, and how governments and parties and policies are packaged in many ways and marketed in many ways, just like consumer goods. And, the communications departments have become more important in order to make sure the public knows the policies of the government, try to make the government look bigger and better than it is, and also to keep information inside government, and so that there's fewer questions asked of government, so that at the end of the day, after all the news cycles, once every 4 years, the government of the day can stay the government of the day. That's the goal of this. That's what this is. It's a permanent campaign, and it's using our money to try to convince us that the government is great and keep the government. I don't know if we'll ever see a government come to power and say that they're going to, on day one, institute all sorts of new checks and balances to check their power and to put themselves at risk of being in office one term and being brave. It would be nice to see that someday, to have a government actually come in and fulfill all the promises when it comes to issues of transparency and accountability. They always like to talk a big game of transparency and accountability, whether it was Justin Trudeau in 2015, John Horgan in 2017, Gregor Robertson in 2008, Christy Clark in 2011. One thing after another, they say one thing and then they do another. It's especially egregious when they do break these very important promises, because these really are about the foundations of democracy. In order for a democracy to function properly, we need that transparency, we need that accountability, we need the checks and balances. But as the great Rafe Mayer once said, that we're essentially electing 4-year dictatorships.
Yeah, I miss Rafe a lot. He was a regular guest on this show.
Mm-hmm.
We'll have more with Bob Mackin right after this.
Arctic Star Exploration, operated by a team of proven mine finders, is focused on diamonds in Finland and the Northwest Territories of Canada. Work programs are underway in Finland and Canada. Arctic Star trades on the TSX Venture Exchange symbol ADD, on Frankfurt symbol 82A1, and the OTCQB symbol ASDZF. Please visit our website arcticstar.ca or call us at 604-689-1799.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Bob Mackin. Bob, the latest in the SNC-Lavalin controversy in Ottawa, Andrew Scheer being threatened with a slander suit from the Prime Minister for things that he's said or published about the scandal. Do you think what's your opinion on that threat?
I think it was a big threat. That was a big mistake by Justin Trudeau. If Andrew Scheer does, as he said he'll do, follow through on defending the lawsuit, if it actually does get filed. Right now it's a threat in Ontario. And, Andrew Scheer, if they're going to fully defend it, then more power to him, because I think the law is actually on its side. There was a case in 1997, the Ironworkers Local 97 sued Gordon Campbell and the opposition BC Liberals after the BC Liberals did a news release and Gordon Campbell did some media scrums outside the legislature. Inside the legislature, they're covered and they can defame themselves all they want, and they can't sue each other for that. But outside the legislature, it's a different story. So that's why the Ironworkers Local 97 sued Gordon Campbell and the opposition BC Liberals, because their news release and news conference said that the union was involved in a kickback scheme with the NDP, because the Ironworkers had members who were working on the Island Highway project when the NDP was in government, and there were donations going back to the NDP. And when it got in front of a judge, the judge said that no, in fact, Gordon Campbell and the BC Liberals enjoy what's called qualified privilege, that this was not defamation. There was a defense to the statements they made, because the judge said that the job of an opposition leader is to oppose, to criticize, to investigate, and essentially prosecute in their own way the words and the actions, the programs, the policies of the governing party. This is just the way it is in our democracy, the way it should be in our democracy. So that judge threw out that lawsuit against Gordon Campbell and the BC Liberals, and that, if it does get to court, you'll see this case probably be one of the leading cases that'll be brought up by the defense, in defense of Andrew Scheer, that what Andrew Scheer was doing was shining a light on the Trudeau Liberals and how they're handling this SNC-Lavalin scandal, especially with all the lobbying that SNC-Lavalin was doing about its desire to get this deferred prosecution agreement, how that Scheer was essentially just criticizing and putting the government's feet to the fire. And so he really should qualify for that qualified privilege defense of defamation. But again, the other question is, will Justin Trudeau and the federal Liberals actually follow through? They've hired Gillian Porter, who's one of the leading defamation lawyers in Canada, to file this. Right now it's just a threat, but the chances of this getting in front of a judge for a trial between now and October, very, very slim. But Andrew Scheer challenged Trudeau to do so, because there will have to be disclosure. They'll have to trade documents. He will have access to perhaps cabinet documents, possibly, and other documents about this, about how the Trudeau Liberals were communicating about this whole scandal behind the scenes. Trudeau would be subject to cross-examination for discovery. There would be the lawyers for Andrew Scheer would have a chance to sit down and ask Justin Trudeau some very, very difficult questions. This would not be an easy process at all, and I think really this is a political trick that we've seen here in BC before. Right before the 2014 Vancouver civic election, the Vision Vancouver party, some of the polls were showing them about possibly going down to a narrow defeat to Kirk LaPointe and the NPA after the major story out of that campaign, the story that I wrote, after receiving a leaked recording of how the NPA, the CUPE, the local 104 members of CUPE, the Outside Workers Union for City of Vancouver, were deciding how to make their donations to political parties, and how they were tying that political donation to a promise made by the Vision Vancouver party that the work would not be contracted out. So Kirk LaPointe and the NPA made that a focus of their campaign and called the actions of Vision Vancouver in making that deal with the donor, called it corrupt. Well, the Vision Vancouver party hired a lawyer and sued the NPA and Kirk LaPointe for defamation in the dying days of the campaign. And that may have worked in the favor of Vision Vancouver. There wasn't much time left. It seemed to have slapped the NPA with this lawsuit, and it got them off their game, and it also gave Vision Vancouver and their base a chance to rally around Vision Vancouver and say that, well, we feel like we're under attack, and that what they're saying is unfair. And it changed the media narrative. It was no longer about the donation from a union to the ruling political party and the deal that the political party was agreeing to essentially protect the workers' jobs. It changed to the NPA is being sued for defamation. It had the effect of changing the channel on the conversation so close to Election Day, and that may have been a major factor in the re-election of Gregor Robertson in 2014. In the case of this situation, there's still many months between now and Election Day on October 21st, and as I said, it's very unlikely that this will see a courtroom between now and then, but it allowed Andrew Scheer a chance, because there's so much time, to say what he said and to dare the federal Liberals to sue him. and to keep the story alive. That's ultimately what this is doing. And Justin Trudeau, every step of the way, has made mistakes on this from management standpoint of managing a scandal, but also, if we reel it back to the very start of the whole situation, of running a government free of corruption and making sure that justice can do its job without any interference. And this never would have been a scandal if he had allowed the justice system to do what the justice system does instead of creating a special law tailored just for SNC-Lavalin. I go back to the 2015 campaign when I asked Justin Trudeau on the campaign trail, and you can hear this on the Breaker.News podcast, when I asked him about SNC-Lavalin and all the money he was promising for transit and why he wasn't going to do anything to eradicate corruption in Canada, because the more money that gets lost through corruption on major transit infrastructure or energy projects, well, that's money that can't go to the environment, can't go to health and safety, or can't be in the form of tax cuts so that people have more money in their pockets and can put more money into the economy on their own. Corruption is a very serious issue, and I don't think Justin Trudeau was taking care of it at all from the very get-go. I think he was very focused on SNC-Lavalin and what the company stands for in Quebec from a job standpoint, and I don't think he was very worried about how SNC-Lavalin and the problems it got into around the world contributed to Canada being a bit of a laughingstock around the world, where issues of corruption are now being top of mind at various international bodies.
Yes, well, some people have joked SNC stands for seriously nasty corrupt, but that's
or as David Berner has also said, Lanolin is a very greasy company, he says, which is sad to say that a company that's been around for so long can't be something that Canadians can be proud of. This is a company that definitely deserves its day in court, and Andrew Scheer, I think, is on the right side of history for criticizing the federal Liberals for not letting the court process just do what it does. Don't interfere with it. Let it prosecute SNC-Lavalin. The charges in Quebec that it's facing are dealing with some very serious issues about bribery and corruption in Libya in order for SNC-Lavalin to get that business. And some of those crimes alleged in the prosecution took place here in Canada, where the son of dictator Gaddafi was wined and dined and supplied with prostitutes, essentially. This is very unsettling, and they can say all they want, this is how you do business in a foreign country. Well, this is not the way Canadians are supposed to do business. We're supposed to be better than this.
Yes, but I haven't heard the Conservatives say they would get rid of the deferred prosecution agreement provision of the criminal code yet.
That's a good question, and that's troubling that they wouldn't get rid of it. I think they want to keep it in their toolbox.
Exactly, so we could have the same thing happen no matter who the Prime Minister is.
Mm-hmm.
Bob, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thank you.
My guest has been award-winning investigative reporter Bob Mackin, the publisher of the Breaker.News. If you have any questions for Bob or any of our other guests, you can send them to info@howstreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of Howe Street Media Incorporated.